Goedenavond. Good evening, everyone. Welcome in what we just noticed is the 5th edition in the series Carbon Stories, organized by KeileCollectief, International Architecture Biennale Rotterdam and Group A. My name is Geert Maarsen, and what we do in Carbon Stories is try to decipher how to reach a climate positive construction world or construction country or construction city. Tonight we will focus on the numbers, how you calculate or quantify your sustainability. My name is Geert Maarsen. I will try to guide you through the evening and make sure you will get to ask questions to our speakers. And our speakers will be a keynote presentation in a minute by Sanne van der Burg and Arend van Waart by MVRDV, followed by 3 presentations by architects there that each in their own way try to do sort of the same, but you will hear about that later on. Please welcome for now our co-host Saskia Stein from IABR.
Thank you very much. It's great to see so many faces. I'm only here to welcome you on behalf of the partners. 5th edition, we felt the necessity to bridge the gap between, again, myself, Saskia Stein, director of a cultural institution, and the people of Group A and CarbonLab, really rooted in the practice of doing things differently. So 5th edition, but keep posted, because we're going to really expand on what does it mean actually to share knowledge and to share expertise. That said, I wanted to take 3 minutes of your time to maybe phrase the idea of the role, or let's say, where does this start, a role, and where does calculation end? I'll do so through the lens of also introducing you to the next Biennale, Nature of Hope, because if you look into the newspapers or on your feed on Instagram, I would say it's becoming harder and harder to find maybe your own personal entry in these planetary questions. So where does one find an entry point? And I wanted to guide this evening, starting by pointing out 2 things. For those of you who are not, it's a bit blurry. Well, doesn't really matter. What matters is that these are 2 diagrams. They're taken from the IPCC report, where on the top part you see that everything we do for climate is not necessarily good for biodiversity. And everything we do for biodiversity, however, is always good for the climate. So bear that in mind when we start thinking about our profession. And I love this diagram that sort of compresses everything from the 19th century to the contemporary condition of how our practice is sort of part of a problem, I dare say. I mean, I love our practice because it is so manifold, but we also have to acknowledge that the nature being extractive in resources or labor, or the role we play in capital accumulation, is part of this possibly trying to understand architecture as climate. So not so much what we can do, but really intrinsically delve in. So my rearranging of the UN Sustainable Goals would then look this way, where we start, and obviously I didn't design this, just saying, but if we really start from the root up, how can we reimagine again the materials we use, how we work, with whom we work? And the hope aspect, this image has been out there for quite a while. And also presented on this stage, but I nevertheless wanted to point it out where planetary questions can be tackled in a global way if we take action together. So what you're looking at is the hole in the ozone layer, which in fact the name, the hole on the ozone layer, was a design. And through that design, it started to spark our imagination. We finally had an idea what that could in fact mean. And legislation globally was made to ban the source of that hole growing, and it's actually shrinking. So I just wanted to sort of point out that if we try to understand our own practice in a detailed manner and steer on behavioral patterns, for those of you who don't know, the essence of hairspray and our refrigerators was containing this, so we were part of the problem. But we can also be part of the solution, because I truly believe, and I stand here in front of you disclaiming that I do believe that there's a whole new narrative that we can pick up on as architects and urbanists. And it's rooted in how we will deal with the challenges that are facing us in the climate, where nature positive building and architecture as a sort of flying wheel for that can be part of the momentum that we're facing. I'll keep it at that, but I just wanted to sort of maybe point out that it's not one singular thing to understand, but really try to understand the practice in a process. So if you work with wood, maybe question where does that wood come from? I'll keep it at that. Who do I give the word to? Back to you. Thank you for being here on behalf of all our partners, and have a lovely evening. Look forward to listen and learn from our marvelous speakers. Also, a welcome to all of you. Geert.
Saskia van Stijn. And we will dive into that narrative in a minute. But before that, I always ask people, where do you come from? Who of you is an architect? Hands, please. Hands down. Who is a constructor? The one and only. Oh, two. Thank you. Who is a researcher in one form or another? Connected to university or University of Applied Sciences? Number of them. Who of you is financing the transition we are talking about? Developers in the room? Okay, good to know, nice to know. Who of you is here for the first time? Hands. If I may ask, why did you decide to come, yes, today? What does a benefit corporation mean?
It's a certificate where you focus on being sustainable as well as inside your company as well as outside, so the impact is
Being totally sustainable, and
transparent about it.
Okay.
And we're the first construction and developing company trying to get this certificate.
Yeah.
Well, this lecture would be
And the company is named?
IABR.
Contour. Okay. And what do you hope to hear, learn, take away tonight? Okay. Okay, great. Who wants to share what he or she hopes to learn tonight? Any expectations? In the back, yeah. I can reach with the microphone. What's your background, if I may ask?
We are a producer of bricks.
Okay.
Yeah, and now
Sustainable bricks or very unsustainable bricks?
no, very sustainable, because the brick we now produce, it's new.
Yeah.
Last Friday we show it to our colleagues, salesmen. We introduce it. It is a CO2 negative brick.
Okay.
And I'm here only to hear from all the people what the demands are. What do they want? What do they need? How can I help them?
Okay. You want to sell more bricks, right? That's
No more bricks, only these bricks.
Okay, great, thank you. I'll come back to you tonight and to you to ask you whether we have succeeded, and we will start with our first steps. They have been giving quite some time, a little more than half an hour, to explain to us what their journey has been, what their lessons have been, and what they have learned in their attempt to achieve fundamental understanding of carbon-based design at MVRDV. Please welcome to the stage Sanne van den Burg and Arend van Waart.
Thank you. I'm Sanne, this is Arend. We have 35 minutes to share our journey into the world of carbon with you. This is called Carbon Stories, and this will be only chapter 1 of our journey so far. We're going to talk about how we at MVRDV have been researching and exploring carbon, and also how we design with carbon in our office. Hence the title, Choose Your Battles, because carbon is a very layered and complex topic, and we hope to shed some light on how to try and find some focus. We love green buildings. As you can see here, we designed this building that actually generates energy, and there's a forest on the 3rd floor. We love green cities. This is the street to our office in Rotterdam, and we are also activists. So we created this initiative to replace parking lots with pocket parks, and some of them even remained. As you see today, if you visit our office, it's one of the smallest MVRDV projects, which is a piece of grass, but we're very proud of that. We also love green roofs. This is a Tainan fresh market, and what you see here is we also greenify roofs to include nature, productive roofs, biodiversity. But now you hear me say green a lot, and you might think we're going to talk about carbon. So what is actually the meaning of green? And that is a question that we ask ourselves, because we represent MVRDV Next, and that is actually the in-house research group of MVRDV. And we can do crazy stuff with computers. And we create software. This is a roofscape. This is software we created with and for the municipality of Rotterdam that actually calculates and quantifies the impact of rooftop policies. We also created Solarscape. This is a software that identifies and visualizes densification potential in the city based on the high-rise regulation and sunspots. We also create parametric urbanism. This is a master plan in Bordeaux that's completely shaped by sun and daylight regulations. And we actually also created a software that designed and drew the facade of the valley in Amsterdam. So we created a custom workflow from Revit to Rhino to Grasshopper and back that drew 44,000 tiles in 27 revisions, resulting in a minimal loss of material. And this means we can do a lot of stuff with computers, and we figured we actually do quite a lot with sunlight, with daylight, with regulations, with materials. We can do environmental analyses. This is kind of linked to sustainability. So what we did is we actually merged our sustainability group and our computational group together into one group, which is MVRDV Next, New Experimental Technologies. This is not all the team. We're currently 15 people working full-time on computation and sustainability together. And sustainability is a fascinating world, fascinating term. Sustainability, for us, it's a bit like a river. It flows in one direction because it wants to achieve one thing, which is a better world. But if you look at the stream, you see that the water goes all these different directions. And if you think about sustainability, then you see that it's such a broad, multi-headed monster, and there's so many things to consider and to think about. You have wind, resilience, social return on investment, water retention. These are all things we want to address as architects in our designs. But if you try to address all of these, you can end up with spreading the peanut butter too thin, and actually you can try to do a bit of everything, and sometimes you end up with not really impactful results. So that's why we said to ourselves, we are going to focus on carbon. Carbon is something that is incredibly important. This is causing climate change. We focus on carbon. So there was a big step that we did 3 years ago when we started our core team within MVRDV that researches and works with carbon. So we have been doing this for 3 years, looking into carbon, specifically embodied carbon. Why embodied carbon? Because this is what we draw on a daily basis. This is what we draw and we build now. And then we started to collaborate and talk to people. And then somehow, yeah, there was also urban carbon and carbon capture, and energy is also kind of related to carbon, and you have sequestration, measuring, and software and tools, and before you know it, you're kind of back again into this big multi-headed monster that is carbon. And there we figured out that also here, if we try to do too many things at the same time, we also end up not getting meaningful and impactful results. So we applied some focus again for ourselves, and we said, we go back to focusing on embodied carbon. And that is the topic of today. And that is because we know that we have a very big impact as an industry. We are responsible for 39% of greenhouse gas emissions as our industry, so we have an impact. And we know that we don't have time anymore, so we have to act now. If we continue business as usual, that might mean that this could be our future. So that's why we're here. We have existing green building rating systems that are here, LEED, BREEAM, all of these things. They're not designed for the Paris Agreement They're not designed to bridge the gap. So how do we bridge the gap? Fortunately, cities, countries, continents are stepping up and defining policies. We have the EU Green Deal, which is super important. The city of Toronto actually is becoming the first city to cap embodied carbon. They have carbon caps, which is for us super interesting. We have 3 projects in Toronto, so this is a fantastic challenge to kind of collaborate with the Toronto Green Standard. California is introducing carbon laws and carbon caps as well. France has very clear regulations, so things are happening and regulations are coming. But that means for us as architects that we need to start understanding carbon and learning about carbon, learning where to find it and how to get a grip on it. And yeah, for us, the easiest metaphor to use to make carbon closer to you and easier to grasp and comprehend is to compare it to maybe food. So suppose I am hungry and I want to do shopping. Then I could say, well, how much does food cost? And I Googled how much food costs, and what we see here is, yeah, food costs between 264 and 523 euros. That's quite a broad range, but I kind of know what I can spend. But if I am more specific and I say, what do vegetables cost? I already have a closer definition. I see here between 22 and 41 cents. And then if I'm even more specific, what do Brussels sprouts cost? You see, the further I zoom in, the more information I have. But it's actually not rocket science. I know roughly if I want sprouts, I know what I have to spend. So developing this feeling for what something costs is something we have to learn as architects. And that is kind of our mission, to equip ourselves with a feeling for carbon.
Well, thank you, Sanne. I'm Arend. I spent the last 3 years studying carbon, and when we started out 3 years ago, our main idea was, well, everybody knows what a budget is, everybody knows sort of what a square meter of building costs, everybody should somehow develop a feeling for what does a square meter of building costs in terms of CO2. When we talk about CO2, we talk about embodied and operational carbon, and embodied carbon is really about the materials, and operational carbon are about your heating cost. And today we're going to talk about embodied carbon. Quick course, we talk about kilograms of CO2 equivalent, which is not just CO2, it's also methane and nitrous oxide. It's sort of a combination of multiple factors. And 3 years ago when we started out, 1 square meter of construction costed about a typical 800 kilograms of CO2, which is more or less a flight to New York. So if you build a big building, it's a lot of flights. So right now we know where is the most embodied carbon. We know that a huge amount is in the structure, a huge amount is in the surfaces, in the skin, in the space plan, but that's for us as architects, it's also a bit of a disappointing topic, because a lot of the carbon is in places that we don't really design. It's in the places that take up a lot of volume, it's in the floors, it's in the core, it's not in places that we really show. Which is disappointing, because if we want to show something, if we want to sort of design something sustainable, we should somehow, we want to show it. When we talk about carbon, we talk about life cycle assessments, and they generally talk about 4 stages. One is about construction, one is about when we use it, and we also take into account the end of life and recycling. How does that work? Well, basically it works in that we account for a lot of things, but we also account for a lot of things far in the future. And when you zoom in, there are way more modules to take into account for each phase. Transport is taken into account. We talk about materials that are part of it. Basically, you can do a huge amount of accounting, and there's a huge rabbit hole of all kinds of specific things we want to calculate. That brings me to databases, 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 databases. and other recurring discussions. I think almost every discussion about carbon starts with databases. What's in a database? It's an EPD, it's an expensive term for an environmental product declaration, and it has a huge amount of data. This is a nice source for a lot of discussions, because there are here 27 numbers and we can question all of them and we should discuss them. How do we use them? We use such an EPD, so here is one for a facade, and basically there are some numbers that say, hey, there's a lot of carbon in here, and we use this to say, okay, if we have 10,000 square meters of curtain wall, we create a little receipt, okay, 10,000 square meters of curtain wall, that costs a lot of carbon. So, there are a lot of databases. We've looked at many things. There are many databases for every country. There are many databases independently. So, if you want to research this, there are many places to find a lot of sources, and when you find a lot of sources, you find a lot of conflicting numbers. The way we resolved it is that we operate internationally. We use a lot of we don't only operate in the Netherlands, but for us the most sane choice up to this point is to pick the German database, which is open and has a lot of clear data that we can use to make our calculations. Well, basically, what we then figure out is try to figure out, well, how much carbon is actually too much. Last boring part, rules. When trying to figure out, hey, how much carbon is now actually too much, let's just first start with the rules, then we can have the discussion why the rules are not strong enough. There is carbon legislation coming for a lot of countries. The Netherlands is doing their part, France is doing their part, Germany not, the UK also not. But Finland and Sweden are sort of, they are on board. And to make it really nice to study carbon is that every country has their another way to look at it. You should take different things into account, you should take a different lifetime. The Netherlands, of course, we even pick a new system. We create our own value for carbon, because we don't only look at carbon, we look at schaduwkosten. And we basically make sure that sort of we can only use data specifically for the Netherlands, which is a bit frustrating. What the Netherlands basically does is we say, well, if we look at an APD, there are 20 factors we should pick. We multiply it by a factor that no one really understands, but we use it, and then we get a cost, which is expressed in euros, but it's not about money, to make it very clear. If you want to translate it back, and this is not correct, but it is a good approximation, €1 of schaduwkosten is approximately 800 kilograms of CO2. Then we have EU levels who said, well, there are 6 standards. This is really not enough. We need a 7th to replace them. They look at 50 years and scopes A, B, C, and D. And I think the one we agree with most is the Dutch Green Building Council, who say, well, we should simplify it. We really need to act now, and we should only look at the A module, what do we emit now? If we look at sort of how much is much, the BREEAM made a baseline scenario which came to 500 kilograms of CO2 per square meter. The MPG started out in 2018 with a very unambitious 750, and to this year we sort of get to 600, but in 2030 we probably get to 375, and then for some projects it will start to get a bit adventurous. France is doing their part. What's kind of interesting for France is that they actually have rules that say, well, once you deliver a building, you need to, you also need to prove that your calculation matches what you bring to the site. And We have the RIBA, who are really not ambitious at all. So there's another group in English in England called the Low Energy Transformation Initiative, and they are a bit more ambitious. And if we put them all together, we basically see that we're okay until 2028, and then things start to get things start to get exciting from a legislation point of view. And then we get to how do we calculate it? Who here ever did an LCA calculation? Can I see hands? That's quite. Who enjoyed the experience? Okay, I see one hand. Well, our frustration is basically you turn designers into bookkeepers, and what we find is we're starting to design a building, and we search for concrete. You get 955 results of concrete, and I think our conclusion is we need less data and not more. We turn designers into sort of specification builders in the beginning of the phase. It's really painful. And once we get a result, I think that's our second part, is that we get a number, 662, for example, and it's actually really hard to figure out, okay, what can I actually do about it? So what did we find out? The heavy hitters, knowing where to look. We looked at 1,200 of these materials, and for us to make it workable, we selected 50. I talk about 4. We talk about concrete. Concrete is the biggest hit, and the cause of concrete causing CO2 is basically because we barbecue limestone at 2,000 degrees, which emits a lot of CO2, and we use a lot of coal. And what you see in these calculations is we have A, which is now B during the lifespan, and C, when we demolish it, we also emit a little bit of CO2. We use 336 as a number, and we also use some sort of rules of thumb for different kinds of reinforcements, because reinforcement can almost double the emissions for concrete. We also talk about steel. Steel is for steel, the biggest impact is in the beginning. And what we see with steel is that in these LCAs, at the end, after 70 years, or whenever we set our lifespan, at number D, we can reuse it because the steel can be recycled, and the amount of coal that we don't use at that moment we can subtract again. And that we can, in some calculations, you can say, well, this actually, the impact of steel is really a lot lower because in 70 years we can recycle it. Glass is probably a heavy hitter. Well, it's just, again, we use large amounts of heat. It emits large amounts of CO2. That's our big hit, number 4. And on the other thing that almost always comes back in carbon discussions is timber. Timber actually doesn't cost that much CO2 to make. It costs some CO2 to dry. And when some people talk about carbon negative numbers, it is always because of this little thing on the bottom. It's a carbon sink. Because we then say, okay, if we grow wood, there is carbon stored in the wood. And with some creative bookkeeping, we can say that it is negative. But in fact, if we sort of, there is nothing really negative about it. There's just carbon in there is some carbon has been taken from the atmosphere, but that doesn't really mean that it actually is negative. And the nice thing about that is also for number C, once you, the way we account it generally is then, well, if we demolish it, we'll burn it, and that probably means that all our CO2 is lost, which brings the interesting thought experiment. If we would bury the wood, it would be, according to these models, way more sustainable. But then because we don't have to use gas to create electricity, we can subtract it again. Our conclusion is, these modules, C and D, they are quite speculative. They there are a lot of calculations that go over 70 years, and it doesn't help us for Paris 2030. And in many cases, it's sort of we use these calculations to speculate for the future. So for us internally, for clarity, for understandability, we only talk about A. We need to act now. Our point of view is rough is good enough, and we sort of want to know where to steer. We talk about the building parts, the big five, and we want to learn from ourselves. Let's talk about the building parts. We learn from ourselves by just looking at our previous designs, figure out how much carbon is in there, and then so how do you do that? You calculate how much concrete is in there, how much insulation, how much EPS. If you sort of make a nice little list, we get a number for how much carbon is in there. And then we look at the floors and we figure out, hey, what can we actually do for the floors? We create a range. We can do sort of full concrete floors. We can also do full timber floors or sort of lightweight floors. And this gives us a range somewhere between 40 and 200. We can do the same for beams and columns. We figure out that if you actually make a bit of a smaller structure, your floor spans will be smaller. You get a bit more structure, but it gives you a big, well, it can give you a big range of certain numbers. So for the structure, we use somewhere between 50 and 150 kilograms of CO2 per square meter. You can do the same for load-bearing walls. Do we do full concrete? Do we do full timber? Do we do ramped earth? Do we do straw bales? For this, we can sort of figure out a range somewhere between 10 and 300. We can do the same for facades, double glazing versus triple glazing, steel versus aluminium versus timber. So basically what we do, we looked at what we built and we sort of make an inventory of, well, what kind of ranges do we have? We can do the same for a facade, for an opaque facade. It has an inner layer somewhere between 10 and 100. It has an insulation layer somewhere between 10 and 40. And it has a cladding layer somewhere between 50 and 100. And if we add it all up, you get a range for an opaque facade somewhere between 60 and 240. And if we sort of start to play a game of wie is it, we can sort of start to eliminate options. And if we eliminate options, our range becomes smaller. And if we make it smaller, also the total becomes smaller. And in that sense, we can adjust our broad ranges into smaller ranges. This is how you would do it for a facade. And for the rest of the things, we use rules of thumbs. Foundations are always difficult. We generally don't really know how much is in a foundation. We know it afterwards. And somewhere when we get the structural engineers on board, but not during the time. And we can do the same for installations, which is generally quite hard to get information on. So how do we use it in a design? This was the big databases part. How do we sort of get all this data from data to knowledge? And we sort of created a little plan on when to measure what. So we don't measure everything all the time. In concept design, we basically define a material diet where we say, well, if we find out that different locations have different potential, so we sort of figure out what can we actually do here. For example, in China, you can build with timber. In other places for high-rise, it's highly unlikely that you're going to make it full out of timber. In schematic design, once we have that figured out and we have a volume and we have some idea on how big the building is, we'll do some calculations to determine where our focus will be. In detailed designs, we start to optimize, and then we basically already have a design and we can really start to reiterate what is the best. And all the way at the end, we will do some full LCA calculations, as most of the time will be needed. This is what we mean with material diets. We talk about different scales, different sizes, and different scales and different sizes also require different approaches. If we look for full biogenic materials, we have not found it reasonable, for example, to do that in large scale. Unfortunately, we're still always bound by concrete in many cases because of fire regulations, because of strength regulations, because of earthquake regulations, because of acoustic regulations. On the small scale, we really try to go for bio-based materials, for alternative constructions and reuse. For public buildings, we try to showcase materials or find programmatic synergies. And for interiors, this is really a showcase, well, for us, the best part to go for bio-based materials. It's generally short-lived and well, demountable. How does that work in concept design? We go back to modeling and sort of really practical stuff. What we have found out is that it's really hard to do an LCO calculation because we have too much data. We have huge BIM models which tell us a lot of things, and it's too much. And because it's too much, you can't really make any decisions. So we work with TU Delft, with Halina, to figure out a way, hey, how can we simplify this? What kind of metrics really drive carbon? And what we basically do is we take a model, we simplify it to simple metrics, and with these simple metrics, we calculate how much carbon is in there. And because we simplify it, we get an Excel sheet with basic metrics. If we sort of multiply our basic metrics with our ranges, we get a estimation of what is where. How much is in the superstructure, how much is in the skin, and more importantly, what can you actually do about it? For example, an office building, it's a real case with a fake image, where we calculated our numbers, where basically we figured out that we can save somewhere between 280 and 507 kilograms of carbon. Well, that's nice, and where is that? Well, a lot of it in this case is in the structure, and a lot of it is in the skin. And what can we actually do about it? Well, for example, the floors. If we would go to timber, it would save this amount of, it would save, well, in this case, it could save almost 60 kilograms of carbon per square meter. If we would look at the walls, that's also a huge impact in this case. Columns, not so much. Substructure we can change in this building. For the facade, this is a comparison between full concrete and full bio-based.
How much in detail you want to go? You have 5 minutes left.
Yes. Thank you. Wrapping up. So, and we can also do that for transparent facades. What did we learn? We can measure everything. We do measure everything, and we can measure everything at all moments. But the main thing we learned is that using these strategies, we saved almost 50% on an ongoing building, and we did that by doing very simple things. By looking at the detail when we need the detail, and by looking at the biggest impact. And it's not rocket science.
Thanks, Arend, for this deep dive. I will quickly wrap up after this super hardcore course in numbers and how exciting carbon numbers can be for architects. Yeah, asking the right questions for us, that is very tricky because we work in 47 countries all over the globe with different regulations and possibilities. That's why we developed the MVRDV carbon guidelines that we will be sharing with all of you today. They are by no means true or false, and they don't pretend to be an answer, but they offer different kind of strategies that you can use, apply to your project depending on the context. You can use this poster to have an informed discussion with your parents, with your friends, with your colleagues about carbon. The QR code will come back on the last slide, so you can scan it then, and you can also find it on our website. We have looked at material diets and how we actually try to change ourselves, and how do we try to respond to carbon in architecture. We, on small scale, built with wood. In countries where wood is not available, in China, we worked with rammed earth. On small scale, we use old beer bottles for a Bulgari. We use recycled plastic tiles in Germany. We found some loopholes in the regulations to make this possible. We use reused and recycled aluminium in Germany. In this project, an AI campus in Germany, we're actually combining different strategies together. Here we have timbers, timber hybrids, and 2 rammed earth buildings. So the fact that we are learning these things and applying them with learning by doing is for us very exciting. We're also going through a transformation wave in China where we actually repurposed this building and saved it from being demolished, saved 11,800 flights. Do not build anything new. Actually, I saw someone on LinkedIn posting based on my announcement that said, why are you talking about carbon? Because you still build things, and this is not right. In an ideal world, yes, would be fantastic if we can only do transformations. Why not? Let's think about it. This is a building in Shenzhen in China that we transformed to form a textile warehouse where we also introduced a green roof. This was picked up by the media as an unconventional approach in Shenzhen, where the fashion is to demolish and build new. Integrate what is already on site. Here we transformed a building pit in Taiwan into an urban spa, and we actually left everything of the demolition on site, so all of the old construction is there. We reprogrammed a derelict flyover in Seoul into the green High Line of Korea. We reprogrammed a space underneath the flyover in Mumbai. Designed for disassembly, this is our first completely demountable project in Amsterdam. This is Matrix 1, so we look into the world of circularity. Is this the answer? We don't know. You could say designing for disassembly requires more carbon. So this is an interesting discussion to have afterwards, I think. Or we design for longevity. This building can be completely reprogrammed to fit the current program or many other programs due to the external circulation. Avoid undergrounds. We didn't build a basement here. The building would probably have been smaller if we did build a basement, but we didn't do it. Rethink parking. In the 90s, we already introduced puzzle parking in Silodam. We introduced reversible parking structures in Bordeaux. Parking on the 1st and 2nd floor in Sri Lanka here. So try to avoid undergrounds. Reduce weight. Mass timber project in France here, and what you see, the inside, actually you can experience the timber. Yeah, big savings here by applying CLT floors, lightweight facades, and saving on foundations. So these are things we are currently doing. Looking at floors, indeed, floors, we love floors. And then finally, last slide, the money question. How do you convince people in the sustainability and carbon discussion? Because it is not rocket science. We have to build less, we have to transform, we have to work with wood, bio-based materials. And what we often run into when we try to discuss this with clients is they say, okay, great, how much does it cost? This is more expensive. And we found that in this project in Den Haag, where we actually are proposing to bring back the canals. Fantastic, why not? We quantified the impact of such a proposal. Look how much carbon we can save, how much less cars, good for mobility, for ecology. And in the end, we were able to convince the city council not with this, but with this, which is indeed the quote from the campaign manager of Bill Clinton. It's the economy, stupid. And actually by showing that this project is not only good for the environment, but it can also generate a local economy. And this is still a very interesting topic to convince people with. So also very curious to hear your thoughts about that. And let's also discuss this, indeed. Final slide. What are we going to focus on for the coming time? We know that embodied carbon is our focus. What we are already doing is focusing on lightweight, on bio-based, and on transformations. The things that we still have to become better at and learn are the topics of fear, uncertainty, and doubt. If you propose something new, you get a lot of questions, and people are afraid to try something new. Tech and regulations, especially in 47 countries, and costs, and how to actually utilize that as an argument to take the next steps. And having said that, this is the QR code to the guidelines, and this was the end of our lecture. Very curious to hear what you think. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Son and Arend. We have, at the end of the evening, approximately 20 minutes to have a discussion with the other speakers as well. But for now, 5 minutes or so for Q&A, practical questions you have for Arend and Sanne. Please raise your hand and I will come to you with a microphone. Could you please introduce yourself and ask your question?
Sure, yeah. So I'm Masa, work at the moment, long life architect, now working with Noun. But my question is, I was involved with such project. There is different facets into it, like what type of projects do you implement these? And I'm interested to know MVRDV, what's the percentage of the buildings that you get, the projects you get, that you can actually get to implement this? And through which phase of the project do you prefer to get in? Because I assume you're R&D team. So I understand real life works harsh. So yeah, both two questions. What are the sectors that you usually focus on for reducing carbon footprint? And then also, what stages and what's the percentage of the projects that you actually get to implement all these good things?
That's, if we look at how we started, we actually, with our team, tried to do a bit of sustainability in all the projects. We tried that, and we learned that that didn't work. And this is fine, because we tried things and we learned from them. This was kind of spreading the peanut butter too thin. So then we said to each other, we're going to find a couple of projects that have an ambitious client that really wants this, that are in a country where the legislation supports and enables what we're trying to achieve. And then we focus with our team, we become part of the team, we work inside the team as team members to elevate those projects. That's the strategy that we have chosen for. And by doing that, we created a couple of replicable examples, like the secret project that I just showed with the tower, where we just did 3 things: timber floors, lightweight facades, less foundation. And this is something that we shared with the office, and then everybody said, I can use this in my project. So what we did is actually focus on creating examples that have replicable strategies and share those, and that really helps for us. Did you have a second question or not?
So let me put in a question as well. But it means you sort of are working in a sort of schizophrenic organization, right? So you want to save the world, and you use some projects for that, and some other projects you destroy the world a little bit more, right? Can I put it this blunt?
I think you can put it this blunt, because this is a nice spicy
we're
question.
Among us. We're all friends. Yeah.
We're all the same, and these are spicy questions, and we like spicy questions. In an ideal world, we would say we only do timber and we only do transformations.
Or we would stop building, yeah.
And we would stop building, yes. Then we have to let go of 90% of our people. We are 350 people. They will apply elsewhere and continue to build. So not building would only work if we do it collectively. So we all go and do something else. However, what we think is that, let's say, no action is the worst action. And what we are doing is we are actually, you saw Arend's passionate talk about numbers. We are really deep diving into this stuff to learn it and to share what we have learned. And what we try to do is we apply our knowledge in projects. So we are going through, it sounds a bit cheesy, but we are going through a transition. And we can only achieve that transition by applying steps and building on those and iteratively just become better at these things.
Yeah. But it's not the case that your logic, your sustainability logic, and the river you're trying to follow downstream in the end, as radicals that you are within MVRDV Next, is sort of completely not in line with the corporate logic that the office as a whole has. Could that be the conclusion in the end?
Yeah, the conclusion is that in reality, we have to go through this transition and we have to follow certain steps, and we also accept that we can only change one thing at a time. And this is maybe a disappointing answer, but this needs time to evolve. And we would love for this transition to have happened already and to be there. And considering the challenge, and especially working on a global level, we just can't do everything at the same time everywhere, and we have to take steps, and we do our best in at least not giving up, and still trying to find these examples that are replicable and share those.
Questions in the audience? Yeah. There was one over here as well, right?
Are you perhaps lobbying as MVRDV Next to set concrete goals for MVRDV for instance, target emission per square meter in 2030 for the office. So you can already say to clients, perhaps, hey, it's nice that you want to build this, but we have set this target. If you're constructing it at this time, we have to comply to the goal we set ourselves. Is that a conversation that is happening now within MVRDV or between your next department and the office itself?
Yes, we have had a lot of discussions about targets, benchmarks, indeed numbers, also your favorite subject, how low do we want to achieve, and also there it's the same as building costs. And I don't know how your experience all is with building costs, but you also always say, this is what it should cost maximum, and it almost never ends up below that. Usually it ends up above that. So yes, we have to be ambitious, and yes, we have to set ourselves targets, but I think that's also a bit the conclusion of our talk today. What are you going to do with this number, and how are you going to achieve it? So we do set that number, but how can any of us make sure that we actually achieve that? And what we rather say is we set ourselves certain ambitions.
I think the question, sort of, if I can rephrase, is are you being radical enough in convincing your colleagues?
What we managed to do is, it's a good question, what we managed to do is to make carbon fun and sexy, and with what we have now is mature carbon discussions over the coffee machine, and we have people slowly warming up to the concept of carbon. I don't know how you see this.
We don't have to convince our colleagues, we have to convince our clients.
Okay. There was one last question and then we will move on to the next speaker.
Yeah. Hi, Reinoud from Lefts Architects. I was wondering, will you be sharing these practical learnings that you were just mentioning so that all of us can apply these things in our project so we can have maximum impact?
There is a QR code, and there are the practical findings. This is a link to the PDF, and you can download them.
Okay, thank you so much. Arend and Sanne, give him a big hand. Our next speaker is one of the co-hosts of tonight's series. He's the founder of and instigator of CarbonLab at Group A. Willem focuses on acquisitions in which sustainability is central from the beginning of the process, and he will share some ideas on how this fight until now has been going and how he thinks it will proceed in the next years. Please give a big hand for Willem van Genuchten.
Thank you. I'm atechnical, so this always happens. Of gewoon het pijltje. Yeah, please, help.
Next is,
Ah, de grote, the big one. As you said. Thank you, Sanne. So, I'm Willem van Genuchten of Group A CarbonLab. CarbonLab is the think tank of Group A, and with CarbonLab we try to research how can we make a carbon negative, a climate positive built environment a reality. We have a good reason to do so. I don't know if anyone went on a city trip to New York this summer. It was really fun. You were in the middle of Canadian forest smoke because of burning forests thousands of miles away. And this shows the effect of what we do. Everything we do is interconnected. It's not simply separate. Climate change happens, it's because of what we do, and it's now, it's not in the future. So for us, CarbonLab was established to see how can we give ourselves an alibi to build at all, which kind of links to what was just discussed. We think, and I personally definitely think, there's only an alibi to build anything if it's storing carbon or if it helps us get there. That's nicely said, so how do we do that? With the CarbonLab, we research a lot of things. We started researching regulation. What do we all have in common? What does the client have to abide to? What does the contractor have to abide to? The engineer, the designer? What materials are out there that you can work with? And who do you partner with? Who do you form an ecosystem with to make this challenge a reality? And of course, costs. What does it cost? We also have to learn a lot about that one. Another thing we do is the actual calculation. what critical unit do we have? How do we work towards that unit? And what methods do we have for that? And we research by design because we're designers. So we try to implement all our findings into the running projects, into new projects, to give ourselves a continuous feedback on what we can actually achieve in the next project better than the previous one. And very important, we try to share as much as possible about this because it's a global effort. There's no point in trying to do this only as a Group A office. We have to really do this all. That's also why we have these evenings. That's why we organize workshops with different teams where we try to exchange experiences, such as the dry calculations. Why do someone make a different choice than we do? First, if you start to aim for carbon neutral or carbon negative, it's important to understand what is the starting point, what is the nulmeting, the zero measure. For Holland, it's quite simple. This is a number from the Dutch Green Building Council together with NIBE. We have 87 megatons left as a construction industry to stay within the Paris Accord. This is an extrapolation of global emissions, Dutch emissions, then the construction sector emissions, set out in time. Maybe we start building or stop building soon, because in 2028, if we continue business as usual, we run out of our budget. There will be a court case, Milieudefensie wins, no more buildings. So we need to be prepared. So this gives us a unit. If you want to stay within the Paris Accord, it means we need to bring the numbers, the embodied carbon numbers of our projects per square meter down. Kilograms equivalent of CO2 per square meter, as just mentioned. That's a number that's used in different countries, as we have actually just seen. But then to get to that number, we need a method. We have taken a few steps in this. And I think this one, for architects who are new to the subject, is a very important one. The current Dutch regulation of MPG is not sufficient to achieve what we all need to achieve. This is a project we have. I will show you more about this later. It's a distribution center near Rotterdam, where we have a MPG of 0.35. The current regulation says 0.8. So actually, we're doing pretty well. We're really proud of ourselves. However, if you only look at the global warming potential, only at the CO2 exhaust, we're at 366 kilos. And we go that precise at the moment, which means we go only or almost twice as high as we can to stay within Paris. So that's something we have to take into account. Another subject which is very important, and that actually just came up with the wood remarks that were made, is the biogenic emissions or the biogenic storage. If you work with wood, if you work with bio-based materials, you're actually storing carbon. Dutch regulation doesn't allow you to calculate this in your total volume of CO2 exhaust. We think it should be different. And yes, there is a question, what does at the end of the lifetime happen to the materials? There's solutions for that. To give you an example, this is a project by my architect, so not by us. And the people of the city of Rotterdam continue to tell us, based on this example, wood is not sustainable. Steel and concrete are better. Very questionable. Another part of our method that we had to deal with is, do you measure within the Dutch regulation, including all the parts that you don't have to calculate, or do you actually calculate everything? In this example, 34% of the actual emissions of the building, you don't have to calculate for your building permit. That's a bit strange. So our method is quite simple. We calculate everything. Every element of the building is into our global warming potential numbers. And we also include all the biogenic as a separate number, so we can see what happens between those two. If you have a method, you need to have a database or a calculation tool, I should say, that can work with it. We made an overview with our team of all the different software that are out there. It's actually quite boring. But in the end, we found out one-click LCA ticks all the boxes that we look for. Not in the least because it combines databases from all over Europe. So we can work with the Dutch database, but we don't have to. Due to the quality of the data, that's really important. Now we'll take you through a few calculations of a few of our projects. These are running projects. They started before we had the Carbon Lab. And we started calculating what do we have in our drawing boards at the moment. It was quite a shock, as you will see. This is a big project, a residential block with parking, with commercial spaces, with bicycle storage, shared amenities. According to the Dutch regulation, it's 460 kilograms per square meter, more than twice what's allowed within the Paris Accord. If you calculate everything, which we do, it's 540, almost 3 times the number. So, pretty shocking. The block next to it, we're also designing. That's a bit earlier in the process, so there we started to look, what can we still do? When you have the number, how can you change it? This is a project, or this is a similar program. Here we could still see into changing facade elements, having more recycled elements. So basically doing the same exercise, what is the low-hanging fruit? What are the real big hitters? Without going into all the individual elements. A completely different project we do, which we showed before, a big distribution center. We first calculated what happens if you do a stereotypical one. What happens if you just build a shed? De verdozing van Nederland. You get a building which is 3 times over the actual target of the Paris Accord. We advise the client, make it much more compact. Look at what we did in the earlier days, the vanilla factory, much more compact, several levels. We cut it in half. Then we looked at what happens if you make it completely bio-based, because that is the trick to reach carbon negative. We actually achieved it, but I must say this is a very ambitious client. He's not that ambitious. They took out a lot of these elements, so we're not going to go carbon negative with this project. And I think we also need to be clear about that. We need to learn to tell stories. We need to convince clients based on data, but also on seductive answers to make these decisions. We're not there yet. So how do we get there? Do we work on projects that do? This is one example that we started when the Carbon Lab was already up and running. It's a residential project in the south of the Netherlands. It's a project in a suburb, quite a high density infill, as you can see. This client is very ambitious. The client wants the building to be completely made of wood. Good starting point. We still wanted to know for ourselves what happens if we compare this with conventional construction. We would reach 430 kilograms per square meter. If we go fully bio-based, minus 61. That's where it really becomes interesting. You go below 0. Plus, we are trying to research, or we are researching with climate cleanup, how can we make this into a carbon credits project to see how can we market the storage of this CO2. And what does it do to the business case? Is that an interesting difference for our client? So far we talked about buildings, but buildings aren't everything. What's actually quite important is to understand before we start drawing a building, a lot of decisions have already been taken. Before we reach the PVA program of demand, we already have a lot of decisions taken on the urban level. So the question really we should ask ourselves is, how do we want to live? How do we want to structure our society almost in the future if we look through the lens of carbon? We looked at this question very high over, so these numbers, take them as a benchmark, not more than that. What happens if you calculate very low density? Let's say Phoenix or lower density. You get 741 kilos per square meter because living in separate houses is very material inefficient. If you look at the other side, this is a Vignoli Tower on Manhattan. Sky high carbon exhaust per square meter because you have to build extremely material intensive. Or what if you look at the urban block? This is the Barcelona block. It's by far the most efficient in material. All of these numbers, if you build in a conventional manner, without calculating the actual urban infrastructure. What then if you make them bio-based? What if you recycle a lot where possible? Then you get completely different numbers, but you still see the total numbers of both apartments and actual storage of CO2 in the middle block is much more interesting. But that's of course not the whole story, because what we do is we live in these cities, we move around in these cities, we consume in these cities. all those numbers you should actually take into account to get the real full picture if you want to have a climate positive urbanism. We are taking this at the moment to another level. Based on a case study, we do so at the M4H, this actual area where we are today. And we do so because this is a plan that's being developed at the moment. Tendering will start for different plots. And we want to see how can we actually make this happen. Not in 2050, how can we start doing this today? On a scale that's overseeable and on a scale that forces us to take decisions relative to this scale. Otherwise, as the predecessor said very eloquently, you lose yourself in trying to do everything everywhere. We have made first calculations, they're in draft, where we first see what happens if you only calculate the buildings and the infrastructure materials. The emissions are set at value 100. We don't put the numbers here because we need to really be more precise in this in the future. But we try to achieve an overview of what kind of tools do we have at our disposal and how do relate to each other. How do they relate when you start to put them next to each other? If we involve in the numbers the nature, the green is for many reasons an excellent idea, but they don't really make a difference if you put them next to what you emit with your buildings. So then the step is what happens if you make it into a circular development with a lot of recycled materials, a lot of bio-based components, then you really drive the numbers far, far down, if you include biogenic. If you look at what people actually do there, what do you facilitate with your development, with your urban development, with your buildings? What kind of lifestyle do you facilitate? If you look at a conventional lifestyle projected on M4H, people have a car, maybe they have 2 or 3 cars, they eat meat every day. Then the actual numbers go from -0, from 100 to -0, back to 230. That has a lot of impact. This is something City First is also looking into quite into detail. What happens if you facilitate a different lifestyle? These are still extrapolations. You can go to cutting those numbers again, roughly in half, by sharing amenities, having different diet options, actually facilitating those in your urban environment. But interestingly, you get back to 101%, so you actually still are emitting. The question maybe is really there. We are soon organizing in this room a serious game, including clients, entrepreneurs from the area, people from the city of Rotterdam, to play a game where we actually have to get to zero development. It will be a very interesting pilot project. Suppose you've listened to all of this, you've listened to MVRDV, and you will listen to the next speakers, and you think, this is not really about us, we have a good portfolio. I want to end with 2 thoughts. This is an example from London this summer, where the minister responsible for construction has halted the demolishing of this project, of this building, with the argument that it wouldn't fit the carbon ambitions of Great Britain, and the architects should go back to researching if they could actually reuse this building and put levels on top instead of demolishing a new build. I think this will happen more often. And there's a good example of hope. It was mentioned before. France is really ahead of us. They have excellent regulation since 2020, and it really pays off. I am there very often, and I have spoken with architects. They are doing a lot in wood, not only expensive projects, social housing, student housing, hotels. The entire Olympic Village is made of wood. There's a wooden swimming pool. So for different market segments, this is possible, and the whole ecosystem of building is changing in France. We can do the same in Holland. Thank you.
Dankjewel, Willem. Any questions from you guys? Please raise your hand, I'll come to you. Yeah.
I've heard a lot about the construction with timber in general. Has there been also a study by which you compare the carbon that timber can still reduce if stayed in the nature and left uncut versus compared to using it in construction?
Yeah, we have started to look into this. We need to look into it more. But I think this question is very important because you want to make sure that the carbon you store or that you claim you store actually stays where it is and is an improvement to leaving it in a forest. That's a difficult conversation, and I think recently we spoke with someone of Staatsbosbeheer, the National Forestry Department, and they are very afraid of this question that in Dutch society and in European society soon people will no longer accept cutting down trees because every tree is considered nature, so that would be a problem for us, not only for us, I think. At the same time, the current volumes of forests in Europe would allow constructing 800,000 homes a year, if you agree that you need to construct 800,000 units a year. And at the same time, this is in current numbers, current forest coverage. If you think of the whole transition that we have to go through, because everything is indeed connected, if we change our diet, we could make enormous amounts of land available to grow everything we need for construction. This is at the moment not happening.
Any more questions? Yeah.
I was really fascinated by your last examples, where I was wondering if you could unpack a little bit which kind of legislation, for instance, in France were pushed forward to enable this development.
Yes, actually in the MVRDV presentation you saw a slide with what different countries have installed in regulation or are planning to. France is, as far as I know, the first country that has a national global warming potential target number. So all the calculations we made, in France you have to make, and you have to live up to that, otherwise you just don't get a building permit. Automatically you end up with wood construction. You end up, actually Paris this summer has banned buildings over 12 levels. I think it's only also because they have certain preferences in urbanism, but it was done also with the argument everything above you can no longer justify in terms of carbon exhaust, carbon emissions. So it's really literally the number per square meter that you can still emit.
Okay, thanks. You'll be back on stage in a minute as well. Willem van Genuchten. Our next speaker predominantly works on projects where the healthy living environment, environmentally friendly solutions, biodiversity, bio-based building and social interaction are crucial. And he will share some thoughts and lessons learned on his experience with having specialized in scaling up with bio-based materials. Please welcome to the stage Tim Vermeent.
Thank you. Right. Hey, there's a presentation missing, or is it directly going to the other one? Yes.
I've mixed up the...
No, there's no presentation behind it. I can go really fast through this one and see if my one is behind it. Sorry, no presentation at all.
Can you start off without and
or you're going to start, and then there's time to arrange it.
Well, yeah.
Yeah? Wait.
Do you want to introduce Diederik, or shall I do it? Whatever you like.
Diederik, the floor is yours.
Let me at least say that Diederik is one of the founders, one of the two, one of the two partners at Ladida Architects. He recently won the Abel Bonnema Prize for his fantastic project. He will, without any doubt, talk about a little bit, and he will share his ideas and his journey on how to become both environmentally friendly and economically friendly. Right? That's your ambition. It has to be. Yeah, sort of. Yeah, please welcome to the stage, Diederik de Koning.
Thank you so very much for the introduction. Yeah, I'm a bit humbled by the other talks because we have an office of just 2 people. So let's say the enormous amount of calculations, we don't have time for that. So we take a much more, let's say, hands-on or intuitive approach to the question. which is much larger than we can discuss now in 10 minutes. So I wanted to talk with you about particular wooden foundation piles and why architecture is still quite superficial. And I would love to do that by introducing het Witte Huis, the White House of Rotterdam. There are people in the room that know much more about this project, so I will not go into detail. But on the archive drawings, it's interesting. It gives an interesting point. First of all, it's an elevation. It's 11 stories high, so one of the earlier high-rises. It's lots of steel, brick, and cement. So we don't consider it a wooden building. But if we look at this section, there's something interesting going on at the bottom. It is still on wooden foundation poles, and it has a wooden roof as well. So the two most sensitive parts of the building are still in wood. But architects don't like to go below, let's say, ground level. We have no idea what happens. We let that to the structural engineer. But if you would have to draw it, it's roughly, let's say, 1,000 wooden foundation piles in the building. So about 15 kilometers in a line, which doesn't take me all the way to The Hague, but a long way there. And it intrigues us because we don't actually draw it in sort of plans, whether it's an architectural isometric view or a section or a building permission drawing. It's always cut off. And we think that this relationship between what happens on the top and the bottom at least should be visualized in order to be able to talk about it. But to have some sort of numbers on the line, it is about 3 hectares of forest, pure forest, that had to be cut for just the foundations alone for this building. There's an interesting story that botanists always complain that architects don't know that a tree has roots. Yeah, we sort of have seen that in buildings and high-rises as well. They have to go in pots. That's not really how the trees would like to form, which is very similar to the foundation poles of the buildings. These are two trees, the spruce on the left and a larch on the right, that have been used for foundation poles because they're nice and straight and roughly the length that allows us to go deep enough. And you see the root system is quite fast, and you can even use that to make more hardened tar, for instance, to treat material. Anyway, so if we cut the trees, we put them upside down, then we have our foundation poles. It's all very obvious to many, but somehow nobody designs with wooden foundation poles still, so we need a bit of a basic intro. The only problem with wood is it rots if it gets into contact with air, so it's either fully below groundwater, or it has, it starts to rot. And that's also a problem in Rotterdam, obviously. So it's a bit of a sensitive topic, I know. So what, let's say in 20th century, in the later 20th century, people started to do is add what's called an oplanger. And for the life of me, I don't know what the English word for it could be. Anyway, a concrete pole that you put on the wooden foundation pole to make sure that the wooden foundation pole is always fully underwater. And then you could add, if you want, a pour or another, I think it's a pile, I don't know. Anyway, a top on as a base for your building. And if that's about 30 centimeters away from the ground level, then basically that's everything you need in concrete, and the rest can be made in a bio-based material, raised from the ground to avoid it, let's say the sensitive parts of the floor to be rotting. So you can make wooden floors, wooden walls, wooden roofs, and so forth. So that's what we've tried to do, and it's kind of interesting that we realize this is a very archaic system. There is a little bit of innovation that happened, but it's really just the top, and the rest is still the same. And to prove that we work that way, it's not easy also with regulations, by the way. This is an image of the foundation pole going in the ground in one of our projects. There's the oplanger, the concrete part on the left that can be cut to length. And this is how it is developed in one of these projects in isometric view. And here, especially in low-rise buildings, you start to realize that the amount of concrete that we generally put in the floor in the foundation is quite sizable. It's quite a lot of concrete, and so we can calculate how much it saves. But yeah, we basically thought, okay, let's just get rid of the concrete and see how we can get there. as far as possible. And I guess in an office of 2 people, that is possible somehow to experiment a little bit more sometimes. So now in all our projects, we draw these foundation poles in. I guess you have to add an image of it, but that's the only superficial image I would like to show. Now, it's so old that, let's say, we have evidence of 7,000 years ago that people used wooden foundation poles for their houses. And what is interesting and striking is that they used the foundation poles also to their advantage. So it's not just that they put them in the ground and they have a sort of base to work with, but they also use the stability of a rammed a pile that went into the ground. So these were obviously full-length wooden poles. So here's an example. This is in the north of Germany, in the Vedderse. It's about like roughly Iron Age, so thousands of years. Not that old, but you see that the pile itself, the wall was about a little less, let's say 75 centimeters tall, and the rest was rammed into the ground to create a stable structure. So the stability of the structure came from the ground, not from the roof structure. This is a bit of a detour, but yesterday I had my first experience digging up an Iron Age house myself in Belgium. In Sint-Gilles-Waas, I had the pleasure to be invited to, I thought, to analyze the reconstructions, but I had to actually do a lot of work. And I found my first pottery of 2,000 years old. But I wanted to show something more interesting here on the left. That's a discoloration in the ground. I hope it's visible. Slightly darker material in the sand. And this is how people can find traces of buildings from the past. The wood has already rotten away, or in most cases has been reused, so there's nothing left from the wood itself. All that is left is the hole in the ground that was filled with dirt and pottery and coal, etc., to give this darker color. And archaeologists have the possibility, they can tell a whole story what happened here. So the pole was roughly to this line here. But then when they took it out, because wood was still a valuable material, they sort of wiggled it around and then they pulled it out, which also shows that the buildings lasted longer than the wood itself. They tried to reuse it. And that is basically the next step that I was asked to portray. Let's say we want to have light buildings, we want to reduce concrete. It's all very, how to call it, we have to talk about less and not about more. What is interesting to do and make architecture with bio-based materials also a little bit fun. And so we are trying now to design these kind of elements, whether it's let's say in this case the foundation pole or a facade or whatever, to talk with suppliers and actually design the elements that we use in our buildings. And in this case, we are looking for now in contact trying to design a foundation pole that can last longer without having the concrete oplanger, which leads us to a very interesting question, and I think that might be interesting to discuss, is that we have to set somehow a life cycle for a building, and the question is how long? Is 25 years enough, 50 years, 75 years, 100 years? And because that has a huge impact on, let's say, the kind of materials you use. For example, if a couple wants to build a house like we showed, they may live there for 50 years and maybe not care what happens afterwards. At least their mortgage doesn't care. So maybe it's okay for the building to last just 50 years. And so these kind of solutions may be a great way forward. And we talked a bit about carbon storage. In this case, it's really in the ground. You can't burn it anymore. It's stuck. So I guess the purest form of carbon storage there is. And it also leads to an important question that in order to make wooden foundation poles, you need a very light structure. You don't want 1,000 foundation poles in your building. So thinking from the bottom up instead of the top down. So designing the foundation poles, the location, understanding how much it can carry, and then trying to reduce weight in the building itself can, well, it will basically trickle down. So for example, if you have a CLT building with a lighter wooden framing structure, you can save half of the material. And we live now in a time when everyone's thinking, okay, CLT is the future. That's it. We found our solution. But sadly, I don't think it's enough. And so we have to go again a step further. And working with smaller clients that you can convince allows people to experiment with that. So yeah, that's what I wanted to highlight.
Thank you so much, Diederik. What I didn't say in my introduction is that you are doing a PhD research that delves into prehistoric, historic, and modern farm architecture. Does this also lead to the conclusion that everything we need to know, everything we need to learn to go into the transition we are talking about tonight is stuff we already know or already learned hundreds, thousands of years ago?
No, that's not the case. I mean, I'm not going to say what is good or bad or what people should do or should not do. We're just fascinated by things, and we see that there is a sort of a longer evolution of wood building. And we always come to the conclusion that our sort of most archetypical housing is from the Middle Ages, you know, and but we forget that, you know, the wood construction industry, let's say, is thousands of years old. So it predates the brick industry, let's say. So if we want to learn more about wooden structures and techniques that might be useful still, then we have to go a little bit further back in time. And it's a bit, you have to use the contemporary tools, obviously, and see how you can play with that. But it's just so interesting. And also, the archaeologists really need help in understanding these buildings, so it's also an architectural task in itself. Yeah. To understand history, I think, is a beautiful thing. You don't have to have a purpose, per se.
Any questions? Yeah.
Now I have to fill out the reference.
You wrote it down, or you? This is a lot of text. You're not going to ask all of this, right? No? Okay.
I was recently just watching a seminar about low carbon foundations, and there was these, I think they do similar projects in terms of size as you do. And I found it super interesting because I didn't know anything about foundations, of course. But they had found disused electric poles, timber poles, and they had sort of covered them with a bituminous sheets. Have you seen that technique or before? Yeah, you have.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know if you were familiar with it, or if you could sort of, if you've seen it, if you are thinking of using it, or does it have any benefits, or?
So the telephone poles, or it's a great reusing thing, but the wrapping. So bitumen is, I mean, you can make, I don't think it's bitumen, it could be, but you can make tar from, it's a bit of a Scandinavian process. I don't think you're allowed to do certain of these manufacturing processes in the Netherlands, at least not for sale. But you can create tar from wood, especially from the roots system, and use that to treat wood. But it's not enough because it's a very superficial layer. So there are other, let's say, techniques to make wood more durable. There are three. There's the platonization of wood, which is a steaming process combined with heating. Then you can just heat the wood, a heat treatment, and you can use a sort of acid to create a pickled wood, so to speak, you know, to make it last longer. The last one is Accoya, for instance, does it. You have Platawood, which does the platonization, which is a technique developed by Shell to extract the oil from it, and then they figured out, oh, if I extract the oil from it, the lignin, then suddenly the wood becomes more durable. That's the steaming process. And we also worked with these companies to develop these techniques. It's very expensive. So, I mean, making a wooden foundation pole out of Accoya, for instance, would be not financially viable, I think. But these kind of techniques are there to make more wood more durable, but they are biodegradable still. So it's a time frame. So you can extend that time frame. Yeah, for example, we think that in BNA contracts, let's say of architects, it should state not only the budget, but also the time frame, because then you can think of, okay, it has to last 25 years. It's a completely different story than it has to last 100 years.
One last question for now. You briefly said we are a small studio, just the two of us. Laura, your partner, is also your partner in life, in love, I hope still.
Yeah, very much
okay.
so. Yeah. On the record, yeah.
And you said it's easier to innovate, or another word, when you're a small office. What's the logic behind that?
I have no idea, because I don't have a larger office. So maybe I'm just imagining. No, we decided with so we got more commissions, and at some point we decided to say no to commissions we don't want to spend time in, and we're just very efficient. We do everything from drinking coffee with a client to gathering materials and actually doing assemblage. So our work is pretty much all over the place. It's not the best business case, I have to say, but we
is that the main issue here? That for you guys, basically being on the same page, saying, okay, we are going to make a painful choice right now.
It's not painful.
Okay.
I mean, but in order to not, if you earn less money, you have to spend less money. So we don't have a big office. We don't have people working for us. We don't have expensive licenses. We have what we need, and that makes it possible to do fun stuff.
Yeah.
And I think, let's say people of our generation, there are many people like us, which makes it possible also to work together on larger projects. But on these kind of smaller projects, I think you can. I mean, Lefs is here in the building, so they said, you have to change 10%, but applicable for 90% of the cases, you have a huge impact. And we do the exact opposite, going to the most extreme that we can within the budget, etc. But for only a small amount of people that can or want to do that. But that's where we get our joy from, and maybe hopefully it inspires others to follow.
Yeah, thanks. Diederik de Koning. I think we've everything lined up for you right now, so please welcome to the stage Tim Vermeend.
Hey. Thank you. You're sitting already for a long time, so I will try to speed up. The last presentation was the shortest one I've ever given. All right. I think our company is in between the companies you've seen. And again, it's like the shortest presentation ever. I don't know. So maybe I have to do it by hand.
Bloop, bloop, bloop. Yeah, that sounds fantastic. But can you just you have to start it, or
I don't know. Yeah, is that it?
Are you sure?
Does something.
It did work.
Yeah. Yay. Nice, thank you. To start, we need a team. I'm not alone. We're with a team which is actually fully busy with transformation, wood and bio-based. I think like a year and a half ago we said to each other we're just going to quit building new buildings of concrete, maybe the foundation, but the rest we're just going to quit. Bit insecure, but actually till now it works out quite well. We still survive, and actually we're growing. And what I can see, I tell you a bit of a story and some things what we did and why we did things, and I hope that it inspires you to also take a route in a direction. We wanted to scale up, so what we did actually, I'm not going to tell you all the numbers behind it, but you've seen so many numbers, and they were good numbers, so it's I think that really takes the floor away for us. But what we did actually, we understand that if we build bio-based, it will save. So the question is, how can we build bio-based, but at the same time being in competition with the traditional way of building. Could be concrete, could be anyone else. And it's been named here a couple of times. If somebody comes to my office, he probably has a budget of 2,000 or 1,900 or 2,100 euros a meter or anything. He has a budget. He also has an idea what he wants. So in the end, we need to be more competitive. So what we did, we drove around all of Europe and really understand the wood industry. We understand the manufacturers, where it comes from, how it's been made, who can make what, how you're going to make it, and in which way you can make it that it's cheaper because you need no labor. So in that end, we try to find out and figure out how it works. But it also means like challenging your main constructor. In Holland, it's a different way in France. It's all the been told. In France, the developer has the CO2 constructor, but probably also the facade constructor separately under himself. But in Holland, you always have the main constructor, that is all. This inspires us to see what happens if we cut it all loose, because that saves a lot. If you build with wood, if you want built with wood, I don't know, who built it with wood already? All right, cool, that's already some. You will see that there's almost nobody on the building place. It's really interesting. So once you start building with wood, you see there's one man on the crane because somebody needs to lift the wood. And there are 2 or 3 people that are screwing the wood, and there's one person that really understands where it has to go. And with that amount of people, you can build 500 square meter a week on 2 lorries. So that will count for 10 to 15 houses a week on speed with such an amount of people, which we thought that's really strange. So if that fits in this guy, he will calculate all advantages over it. But if we cut it loose, it's just cheaper. It's just 5 people or 6 people on. It's not that difficult because it's just screwing. So in the end, what we did is we tried to see which kind of contracts there were, and these contracts suit with the way that we design. And I will show you later on what it gave to us. I hope actually in the end it will be this again because it's a lot of work. But till now, we thought we'd take a step forward because we just want to be in competition. If you want to be in competition, you have to be fit. So we are training. But in the end, we all want to make quality, and that means that we need typologies, because as an architect, we build typologies. We build row houses, we build all types of typologies. Some typologies are better for wood than others, we found out, which is really interesting, because then we're better in being competition. Because if I have to be in competition with, I'm a good swimmer maybe, well, you know, I like to surf, but if I need to run to somebody, I definitely lose. Yeah, I will lose. So I thought I want to be in competition with somebody who also swims, because then I'm better. So we tried to find out how can wood be in competition with the different typologies we have, and then make this bio-based. What has already been said, you can calculate carbon. So the more wood I use, the more carbon I store. But that's not fair, because I've got a full fat block of wood and I will win. So that's not the case, because then I store more. So what we did is we tried to find out how can we make these different buildings, and then some are on speed, others are on material, and others are in combinations. All of these have its advantages and disadvantages. So by all of these typologies, we were trying to make, for instance, this is typology A accent, A double accent, A triple accent, to really understand how these typologies work, what can we make, and what can we bring to our clients. That's a really bad picture. In the end, but it says it all. For instance, this is one floor of around 500 meters. We built it here in Rotterdam. This is 1 week. You can just put it there and it's completely watertight and wind closed. What you see is a normal typology you see a lot. It's a typology which is a gallery typology. It's really normal. But for instance, normally a gallery typology has been built up in walls like this, but we turn the facades like this, so we've got a full row of fast laying plates. That's really fast. I think fast is good, because fast is cheaper, fast is better. So in that case, that's one thing. The other thing is that I've got already half of my facade, which is also good. Because if this would be construction, it would just be construction, I had to pack it for sound, for other things. So what we did actually here is try to rearrange an existing typology. And that's what we do now at the office, rearranging existing typologies over and over to keep them fitter, to be them better, and then put the right materials in. Because sometimes it's wood, but sometimes it's fibers. You know, it can be good with fibers. Inner walls, I don't need wood. Fibers are nice. 500 or others, you can just use them. They're also fireproof, so again, it takes carbon, even more than wood actually, fibers, because they grow faster, it's easier to recycle. And with these fibers, we can build those buildings. But we have also higher typologies. This is another construction. Again, you see column beam structures, some of them that I would probably understand them, but they're slower. So they're really nice, but they're slower to build. So I have to do other things to be in competition with this. So in the end, it's all finding, I'm not going to explain all of it, so you can ask, but is that make use of the right thing. So here we make a lot of use of the, where the wood is going to be made, you can ask a lot. Do they have a 5S, do they have a route, or do they route on both sides? So they come as flat packs, and those flat packs then going to be ensembled. And then the numbers, that's the only numbers I've got with me. If we do that, we have to be in competition. So this is an average building. Don't know which building. It's like 40 small houses. I think the budget just fell off. Would be around 5 million-ish. And then you see what it normally costs, and we break them all down. So we break them down in carbon because we know if we use bio-based materials, we're already low. And then we see where can we use them. And then you see, for instance, that in the skeleton or in the facade or in the inner walls, we replace them. We try to replace them, replace them, replace them. And if the material is more expensive, it needs to be faster. If the material is more slower, we need to find something else. And in that way, we're busy with being in competition and being fast. And what you see now is that we can say, hard up loud actually, is that bio-based building doesn't have to be more expensive. We can build row houses, towers, the examples that you saw, within or even lower the budget of standard buildings. So for us, there's not even a choice. If somebody comes to us, we will say, or we build it like this, because if you like money, it's going to be fine. You know, you just got a better building, which is better for the environment. And that you can't say no. And if you say no, that's fine, and then we go on because we really want to get better. And if we don't train, we don't get better. So this is also the reason why in our company we said no, because otherwise 50% of the people would work on something which once they don't like, and second, they don't train. They don't get better. They need to get better, they need to train, so if they spend 100% of their time on bio-based, they get faster. If you understand the typologies, the methods, the type of construction, and the type of contracts, you can be in competition. I hope in the end it's going to be only architecture. But for now we have to play a different ball game, hopefully temporary, maybe for a couple of years, and everybody's getting better in this. I have one example that I run through, like one building, then you can see how we now start with our buildings and environment. One, we understand the social cohesion. We will see where these are the nice people that are going to live there. No, it's just like the birds, everything's going to be transferred. So one, before we go there, this is a building of roughly 30 million. So you always ask your client, understand what is there. It costs you 2,000 to 3,000 euros. So if you calculate it, it's not that difficult. Then you understand who to protect or which animals you have to help. You know, sometimes you can help animals with your building. If you go in, then you try to see, even before you designed, you understand the animals. Where are they going to be? It's also not that much work, because in Holland we don't have that much animals. If you see them, if you've done them 10 times, it's interesting. And if you're in cities, many animals are the same. So you get fast in it. Then you understand you have to build with wood. So you have to understand the type of construction. So you have to be in the right corner to search. Again, being fast in this makes sense, because then you got time to really design. The further you are with your knowledge, the more time you have to be a real architect to design your building. Here we made a column beam structure because we needed to go to 30 meters. And we now are able to make them without a concrete core. So there's no hybrids anymore. You can just build them. In the end, we will share it all if you want it. It's already been said before. We also share the same if somebody wants the even the diagrams or you want all the information, it's just for free. Then you implement them in the structure. You see where you can do this, how many bushes and trees which are good for which bird, and then you design with it. How can we design something which is as well good for us, as for the environment, as the needs of what we want to be there. So you need to find some synergy somewhere and try to see if that's possible. And then it's really simple. What we try to do to get it to our clients is to design something bio-based, which really looks like what we do now. They're all architects here, so they understand that this type of wall is just a wall made out of houtskeletbouw, wood, houtskeletbouw wall. It's also been used on concrete. It's really simple, but only we fill it with bio-based isolation. It's not really difficult. You can ask it. And it is not much of them, it doesn't matter that much. And you also montage it the same. It's in the same way. The floor also looks like it when it's black, but it's wood. And of course you need to do something for the sound and something for the fire, but actually it's not that difficult. So I would really challenge everybody just to try. Everybody says it's difficult, it's not difficult. It's just adding some materials. And then, like with every building, you just add the things that you need for your heating, your ventilation, etc. It's again the same what you do normally in your daily practice. Of course, I would like to add some more green, and then neutralize the trees and go on. And then, of course, it needs to fit like an architect to the environment, etc., etc. I just click on. In the end, and then you have to make. What we actually did, we make menus out of the information that we have for the people that live around our building. Because we got so much nice information. If you project it only on the building, that would be a shame. So most of the ingredients that we need to attract birds, we can also use for plants in your own garden and make tea or something else, which makes it fun. So these menus are for, as well as for our small friends, and ourselves, and if the whole neighborhood can benefit by it, why not? We have the information already. And then the last one, it's already been said, in the end, we would like to cut as less trees as possible. So together with TNO, we're working now on recycled CLT. We're going to use it in the building that you saw. It's been made out of pellets, and it's possible. You know, the strength is enough. So that means like the whole question, can it be recycled? Yeah, from CLT we can make CLT, and from pellets we can make CLT. So in the end, it is also circular. So we don't have the question about is the carbon stored? Yes, for a large part. Of course, it needs to be routed, it needs to be well, but a large part can be reused and reused and reused. I don't think it will take long, but these ones are already going to be used in the building that you saw, so we're going to build that one, I think, starting next year, end of this year, we hope. And we already put a percentage of it of recycled CLT in. In the end, we want to upgrade this, you know, so it can be faster and more and better. And still, even with this, we're in competition, you know. It's the same money we spend on a building as we would do when it would be normal. And then some practice. Yeah, what kind of projects can you do? Yeah, we put some under construction. We have quite a lot actually, because once we stopped, we only do wood or the rest. And the most exciting thing is it's really fun, because finally you can really add something. It's not only the design, you can do research, you can be a pioneer, and then really make something. And that's important for us as architects. There are many architects. I think in this transition we've got a role. We've got knowledge. We've got the intellect to really see and oversee and overview over the whole sector, and we do not benefit by buying things or selling things. You know, so I really think that we as an architect got a good role to play here and play this role carefully with the right knowledge. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tim. while Arend, Sanne, Diederik and Willem are joining us on stage, I have only one question for you, Tim. If you've told us a number of times now, it's easy,
Yeah.
it's profitable,
Yeah.
And it's a lot of fun. Why is not everyone doing this?
Time.
Time.
No, I do think in the end a lot of people will start working with wood because numbers already show that we have to get somewhere. Why not doing it? Because changing is different. It's difficult. When I've been taught at the University of Delft, I had not one course of wood. So we need to learn to use it. And I think once we've learned it, we will use it. But we need to learn it.
What did it cost you as an office, as an agency, as a person?
Cost in the sense of?
Cost in the sense of what investment did you do? Was it time? Did it take something to convey your partners, your colleagues, your?
No, my ship is really easy. My ship has no partners, so I could just say we go left or right. It makes it more difficult when your business is larger.
They still have to listen, Tim, and they have to be enthusiastic about your plans.
I think that many people here will not be not enthusiastic when they make something which it does nothing harm. And it's not a difficult question. If you would ask somebody, would you do the environment harm with your building or not? That's the question that you ask me. I would say that 90%, maybe 99% here would raise his hand. It's not that difficult because that's what you rather have. At the same time, you probably want something that is beautiful and you want impact, but I don't think that's a difficult question.
No. In a minute, I will ask you what you have heard from your colleagues talking on stage and what inspired you. So what lessons you draw from the other talks. But for now, I would like to give you the possibility, the last 10 minutes, to ask some questions to all of our guests. Or are you satisfied already? Very, very hesitant, yeah.
Hi, I'm from Japan and just came to Rotterdam 1 month ago for my master's in urban planning. And then I was talking with my friend here, and then we got another spicy question. So today we're all talking about using those trees, but how about reforestation? Do you have any idea? Because we all know that the Netherlands is not a big country, but in Japan we use wood because we have a lot of forests, and then apparently we planted too much after the World War II. So now it's time to use them. But how about in this country?
Is the question if we like reforestation or if we want reforestation?
Now, where do you get the wood from? In Japan, there's a lot of wood. Diederik?
I can maybe kick it off. I just wanted to highlight that an ecologist would mark, let's say, forestry as a monoculture. It sounds great, a forest, but not much lives there. If you go to Sweden, it's thousands of kilometers of the same tree, doesn't do much. So I think the question should be: can we do agricultural forestry, or however you want to call it, in a way that not only is good for the building industry, but is also good as a space to be? To that, I don't know the answer, but I think maybe that would be the right question to ask.
Yeah, it's kind of like the green desert, right? Yeah.
Any more questions? Or do you really want to go to the bar? That's an option as well. Yeah.
Thank you. Sorry, another question. We talked a lot about wood tonight, so I think it stayed in my mind, but I think it was in MVRDV's presentation that I wrote down the question. When you were showing the five top materials that cause carbon emissions, embodied carbon, you had timber, and it showed timber having quite a large impact in stage C if it's been burned. But of course, and I guess this is also a problem with life cycle assessments and this sort of stuff. Again, it's the timeline question. We don't really know what is going to happen with that timber in 35 years, 50 years. How are we sure that, whoever is going to take down the building is not going to burn it? Or is there discussions in the industry about how to make sure by contract or in other ways that that timber gets actually not burnt? And
Yeah,
not
there are quite a
released
lot of
back in the-
discussion about it. Many of those timber constructions, which are from CLT, are quite easy to dismantle. And there's even one company now that has a sort of statiegeld on it and takes it back. So in the end, I think that the value of that wood is so large that you will be really stupid to burn it, actually. It's the same with the pellets, because if you normally have a pellet where you transport things on, it's going to be burned, actually. It's going to be these small things that you put into a kachel, a stove. And if you now reuse it as CLT, it's worth 8 times. Why should you burn it? Even without being, I mean, I'm a bit activistic for the environment, but even without being that, I can explain to somebody that's not really a smart deal.
Yeah, and actually what you normally do is you would cascade your timber down, you reuse it for other things. And we always kind of jokingly said to each other, like, if you truly want to build a building that's carbon neutral, you would have to calculate the carbon footprint, the embodied carbon footprint, dig a pit, throw in exactly as much wood as that building is worth in carbon, and then build your building on top of it. And so I thought the timber foundations was kind of eye-opening, because we were always talking about digging a pit, throwing wood in there, and then it's carbon neutral. But to use it as foundations is brilliant.
Oh, yeah. Well, it's not a new thing, huh? We didn't invent it, but I wanted to add one thing. So there is not an alternative. Let's say, I guess now that is so CLT is great. But I think it's very important to keep in mind that if all the buildings are in CLT, it would be somehow still wasteful that we use so much timber for the material, wood, the structure, to make our homes. And you can go even further. So the CLT is now sort of okay. That works. But from that starting point, you can go even further to make a light building. CLT is still relatively heavy. If you build lighter with the timber framing as an example, insulation is lighter in general, then that also has an effect on everything. The structure can be lighter, the foundation can be lighter, the trucks can be lighter, you need less material, less trees, etc. So I think the question of building lighter, which was also in the MVRDV tagline, let's say one of the key things, I think whatever material we use, using less is always better. Even if it's a good material.
I want to use the remaining minutes to ask about your take-home, your learnings. Diederik, you inspired them in using wooden foundations. What have you learned tonight from your colleagues?
That maybe we should quantify things a bit more. I mean, it's never occurred to us to start to put, let's say, CO2 numbers on everything, or weight even. But I think that's really interesting because we don't actually know what we're talking about, and everyone seems to be looking.
We, as in you two.
Architecture. No, I mean in general.
Everyone
right?
here in the room.
I mean, there are huge quantities. What is a ton of CO2? We were trying to grasp numbers, and I find that really interesting. That sort of the effort of trying to make that sort of understandable, not only for architects but also for clients specifically, in order to maybe change regulations, I mean, so from politics backwards to go back and do something. I think that's, it made us look like we're just fooling around, let's say. So that I thought it was a very, there was an eye-opening.
Still, Sanne Arendt, you said we calculated everything there is, and we conclude with we just go for what the low-hanging fruit, or what we think is are the big heavy hitters. Is calculating the option? Question one, and question two: what have you learned besides using more wooden poles at the next MVRDV structure?
I think, as you mentioned, we should have fun with this. It's a transition. It's also a collective exploration and a learning. Wooden foundations, love it. But also, calculating. You have seen how deep we were in the rabbit holes of numbers, and what we would like to focus on now is just what we see from you is doing stuff. and actually get out a bit of the rabbit hole of numbers. We can have very educated discussions about numbers, but we actually want to get our hands dirty, apply the knowledge we have. We're just starting our first straw bale building, which is super cool. MVRDV goes straw bales. So yeah, taking steps together in the transition and learning from each other is the thing that I think is incredibly valuable.
Yeah. Arend?
I think I saw wonderful, inspiring stories about how bio-based materials have grown over years. I have gotten a lot of inspiration about how my colleagues really dig into all practicalities, all collaborations with constructors, and how these kind of things, they may seem dry, but they are really sort of the things that are stopping us from applying that. So that's super inspiring, and I think from also from Group A, the way we can push further, the way we can do this in an urban environment, I think we can learn a lot from that.
Yeah. Tim, what have you learned from your colleagues tonight?
Actually quite a lot, but what I thought was most interesting, that everybody's got his own route with the same type of goal. And what is interesting is that I think it's too broad, it's too difficult as one company to do this. So we're now being in upscaling with wood. Others are busy with the numbers, and others are busy with being a broader picture. But in the end, it is all different kind of knowledge that we need, because we have to build in full spectrum. And what is most interesting is that all officers try to find a route and try to find where they're good at, so they can teach it to others. Because if the teaching from what you're good at would really make us as architects different from others, that we can just bring it to all of us. So yeah, it doesn't matter who has a story in this, and if it's an interesting one because it has a path, and that's interesting.
Yeah. Before we go to you, Willem, my question was for Erik Contour over there. Have you gotten what you hoped for? Have you gotten inspired? Have you got enough examples to bring to the office tomorrow?
Yeah, I think I got some stories to tell tomorrow morning, which is good. I think it was very insightful. I also think we've been on quite a similar journey, as well as working a lot with numbers and looking into more bio-based products. Yeah, we're working on it, but it was an inspiring session.
Okay, for you, we've succeeded. Willem, last words are for you. What did you learn, and how do you look back on tonight? And last question, can you say something about the next Carbon Stories event?
Yes, I can. What I think, if you zoom out a bit of tonight, what's interesting is that no one mentioned the word concept once. Yay. We're all architects, we all are educated to think conceptually, and we are thinking conceptually, but with a completely different set of glasses on. Practical, quantifying, actually solving an actual problem. I think that's really great.
Can I just say one thing? Because I think it's very interesting. Some people, traditional architects, still consider bio-based building a concept, like a niche, through the lens of being trained as a conceptual architect. And I think that's almost the biggest insult you can give, let's say, people that work with bio-based buildings. Like, this is it's not a nice idea we came up with to make a design. It's really a necessity. And I think it's a great remark. It's really, we have to let go of this. We were all educated, I think, in a conceptual architectural manner. And it doesn't, we don't address it, but it takes a huge effort to think differently, to design.
This series sort of feels like an ongoing identity crisis, Willem. Who of you, I'm not sure, who of you wants to quit their job starting tomorrow? Okay, okay. Stop building, so it's sort of half quitting your job. So, but when is the next session in this collective identity crisis, Willem? 30th of November, I think.
Yeah, but first I want to respond to the not building once more. I just started reading a book.
This comes up every edition, right? We should stop building. We should do something else. We should make a covenant. Or
I think if we don't act fast, and we are, and we're all trying to, but the rest of the world maybe not catching up as fast as they should. Mm-hmm. That would mean we will have approximately 1.5 billion refugees going north. That will be the biggest design task ever. not one we're waiting for, but this is not unthinkable at all.
Okay, okay.
Just, I
To
don't
add
remember
something
at the
to
moment
the,
the writer.
to the
but
identity crisis, yeah. But and then the next session will be on the 30th of November.
Yeah,
We will be talking about
November 30th. We will talk about the role of circularity in cutting down CO2 emissions. We will have someone from Metabolic who just published a paper on European levels of circularity, the potential of circularity, and the quite limited potential to fully become circular, actually, which is, for me, it was new. We will have someone from New Horizon, Michel Baars, who approaches this question from actually harvesting buildings and turning them into a whole range of new building products. Saman Mahadi from Reborn, a company that only develops transformations, mostly in The Hague and Amsterdam, if I'm not mistaken. And we're trying to get someone from the city, because all the future editions until June next year will be about how we apply this in M4H.
Okay.
How can we make all of this land in this actual area?
Okay. Thank you for now for being here. Let's go for a drink at the bar. The end to the left. Thank you for now for our guests tonight. Diederik, Tim, Willem, Arend, Sanne. See you next time. Diederik, dankjewel. Dankjewel voor de moderatie weer. Ja, leuk verhaal, ja. Ja, dus,